So just to shift gears a little bit, back here to us, the demands that are going to be placed on the healthcare society and the family, financial requirements, sustaining the Medicare system. So I guess, why is this in here at this particular point? It does bring us back to I'm just aware of this now, the stresses that we experience in our culture, the financial burden, sustaining the Medicare system, it's really a crisis, I think, that, that not having enough to retire, now that we're going to be probably living longer, how to plan for that, placement issues, caregiver issues. When you're talking about stress of caregivers, the like middle-aged woman or I guess 40s who is trying to raise her children or just is finishing raising her family, and now the burden of taking care of the parents. And so often from what I hear, people who I talk to on this crisis line where I work, it often seems to fall on one member of the family, and I don't know if other people have found that, if that's a personality thing. Maybe the caregiver child type ends up taking on a lot. It's really hard in our culture, that we're spread out and live in different areas. So anytime we do research in general, particularly with this group, it's important to keep in mind individual differences, because there's such a variation once we get into the older group between each individual because of health problems that occur and cognitive, physical, that really can make two, like say for instance 75-year-olds, look so different. And so just something to keep in mind, because there is a problem with using chronological age, but it's the best thing we have as a marker to know where a person is. Like a 75-year-old has lived 75 years, but it really doesn't have too much to do with aging, because we all age differently, and even within the body, different parts of the body age differently. So biological aging is probably more significant than the number, chronological aging, and it's because of individual differences. So important to keep in mind, how some 65-year-old maybe looks like a 75-year-old because of health problems or lifestyle or attitude. Another important thing in this area is cohort effects. And this is really important because the group that's elderly at this point in time isn't going to look the same as the group that's elderly 15 years from now. Each generation is shaped by historical experiences. So it's really important that we know when we're working with people, older people, that we know the historical period in which they were growing up, they were a young adult. And an example of something to be aware of as far as cohort effect is that people who are in their 80s and 90s right now weren't really exposed to mental health other than it being a stigma, or it's something to be ashamed of. So they're going to be more resistant to getting help, and probably ashamed of being in the psychiatric hospital, and resistant to being hospitalized if they need hospitalization. It's not necessarily that older people are different. It's just that they had a different experience, as far as you think of music and what they were exposed to and what became important to them is different because of what was going on historically. And if we this is something that it's important to keep in mind because as different cohorts come along, places like nursing homes will have to adapt to the next group. And now when I visit nursing homes, I don't know if you've all noticed this, like even the menus are, sometimes from some other era. I can't think of anything offhand, but so I don't think that people today, say middle-aged people or young people when they're older would be eating that same kind of food, or they'd probably have ATMs in the nursing home, or it's going to look different. Just to kind of plant this seed, just to try to be aware of your own biases as far as the group, elderly group, and what the common stereotypes are, so we can help to debunk those stereotypes. For instance, this idea that the elderly aren't suitable for psychotherapy, and maybe they might not feel comfortable with that term, or at first they might not like that idea, but once they get involved, then they can do a lot of work. Or that the elderly are not interested in sex. And tomorrow we'll talk about sexual changes, physical changes that occur. And the other thing along that line is the nursing home issue, and that people continue to be sexual throughout life. I mean, we remain sexual beings. That doesn't go away. Now, some people are more interested in it than others. And I had a woman who I was seeing who was 92. She was in a nursing home, and she fell in love with this other man in the nursing home, this handsome guy with this shock of gray hair, and she was really sexually attracted to him, and she kind of didn't know what to do with her feelings, her physical feelings, her emotional feelings. And the staff, they're not real open to, fostering those kind of relationships, but it was so important to her. And then when they wanted to be physical, how do you do that in a nursing home? It was Catholic, but just by chance it happened to be. I mean, she got really good care there. There were some nuns, and the care was excellent, but there was this issue. And along the same lines, I've run into this. I don't know, I'm curious to hear what other people have run into, where the residents are treated like children. And and this one very bright, accomplished woman who it can be very difficult and complains a lot, she just is so upset about this. It triggers something in her, obviously, from her past, but this idea of being treated like a child. And I hear what she says, and there is this subtle tone of, the staff they're in charge, and, it's hard being at their mercy in a way. So some other myths: that older people are generally alone and lonely. Most older adults maintain close contact with family. This is kind of on the positive note. That older people are sick, frail, and dependent on others. Most older people live independently. That they are often cognitively impaired. For most older adults, if there is a decline in some intellectual ability, it is not severe enough to cause problems in daily living. That they're depressed. Community-dwelling older adults have lower rates of diagnosable depression than younger adults, and they become more difficult and rigid with advancing age. That's a common misperception. Personality remains relatively consistent throughout the lifespan, and that they can barely cope with the inevitable declines associated with aging, and most older people successfully adjust to the challenges of aging. So this was from the APA. And again, here, I know I'm speaking of aging in such general terms as far, we're talking about, what are we talking about as far as age groups? So, these are just kind of generalities, like probably from, I don't know, age 70 on, but I guess it's all a relative thing that we're all aging and we're all trying to adjust to, changes in the stages of life.